So welcome everyone to this first session in the Young Speakers series of the Global Land Program with the topic Rural-Urban Interactions. So it's a new initiative that we started within the working group because we thought that in these very difficult times for everyone, I guess, and I hope you're doing fine. In these very difficult times, it's hard to get in touch with other people. It's already hard to keep the contacts with your own research group. That's at least what I experience. And then it's very hard to keep your international network alive. And we thought this is especially difficult for young researchers that don't have this established network yet, like more senior researchers have. And therefore, we decided to start with this Young Speakers series, which will be short talks of young researchers on the topic of rural-urban interactions. And the idea is to organize this on a monthly basis. So this is the first March session, but we also have this in April, 15th of April, in May and in June. So to all the people of you, I would like to launch a call. If you're interested in giving a short talk, 15 minutes, you're more than welcome. You can send me an email with a proposal and then we'll try to schedule you in one of the next sessions. So for today, we'll start with three speakers. The organizers also asked me to tell that everything will be recorded. It means that not your own webcam will be recorded, but your interventions if you have questions. So I hope you all agree with that because some of the community could not join today, but they would like to see the recordings later. So that's the first communication. There is also technical support available in this room. So if you have a technical problem, you can address these people, which you will see in the participant list. Okay, if you're all set and ready, we'll start with the presentation, 15 minutes, and then there will be a bit of interaction moment. But during the presentation, you're asked to mute your microphone and also to turn off your camera. After the presentation, of course, if you have a question, you can raise your hand and then also ask your question. So the three speakers of today are Niels Debonne, who is a very fresh doctor from VU Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And the second speaker is Samuel Tumwesigye, who is with Mbarara University in Uganda. And then the third speaker is Dominik Kaim, who is a doctor already and working at the Jagiellonian University in Poland. Okay, so this is quite diverse, and I think it will be nice. The first speaker will be Niels. Niels, if you're ready, you can say something more about yourself, maybe very briefly, and then you can start with your presentation, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Anton. Well, what else can I say? I've been working at the University of Amsterdam for a couple of years now, 5 years, did my PhD there, continue to work there now. Well, I kind of think I'll just start presenting and we'll see.
That's perfect, Niels. Go ahead. You can load the presentation, maybe.
Yeah, I'm sharing it now, I think. Yeah.
Okay, I can see the screen. If some people don't see it, you can report with the technical support. Okay? But I think it's okay, Niels. You can start. Yes.
Okay. So, first of all, thank you for attending. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about my work here. This work that I present today is basically the work that I did during my PhD. So, the first 4 or 5 years I worked in Amsterdam. And it's all about agency, actors, who decides over our agricultural lands, over our land systems, and are there maybe changes in who is deciding over those land systems. That's the red thread that runs throughout my whole line of research in my PhD. And in this presentation, I'll then talk about large-scale land acquisitions, but also medium-scale farms in sub-Saharan Africa. And then at the end of the presentation, you'll see more about what I mean with these agency shifts. So first, I'd like to give you somewhat of an idea of what I mean with new actors and well, who decides. And I would like you to imagine a farm or agriculture. So, and I think if you have it in your head right now, that image, it's mostly going to look a lot like maybe the top image here, which is a Dutch farm on which I actually lived for some time, about 100 hectares in size, family managed farming system. But it could be something completely different as well. And this is, for example, the Chinese Swidden land system, slash and burn agriculture. It's communally managed. It's 20 hectares in size, give or take per person, completely different scales. Or this Ethiopian smallholder land system is only one hectare in size, also family managed. And this picture actually, by the way, side note, is a farm that Anton might recognize because it's a farm that he and I visited in 2014 when he was my master thesis supervisor and we were doing research there. Now, anyway, all these systems very different from each other, but we, from the land system science community, do understand them quite well. And of course, we can still learn, but we understand them quite well. And that's not really the case for this one. This is the purple square is still the same scale as the other squares that I show here. This is a large scale land acquisition. They can be thousands up to even hundreds of thousands of hectares in size. And these kind of mega farms, often called land grabs, they started appearing somewhat around 2007, and currently they cover vast areas across the global south. And they are not managed, of course, by families or by communities, but by international investors. And that's what I mean when I say a new actor working at a dramatically different scale. We don't really understand those quite well yet in the land system science community. And that's what gave me my first set of research questions back in 2016 when I started this. I wanted to include these giant large-scale land acquisitions in land system science, and specifically I wanted to include them in land system change models, so the tools we use to look at future land systems and project under different scenarios what will change. So for our current land system change models, the main issues with large-scale land acquisitions were that they're so big. The sheer size of large-scale land acquisitions are a challenge because they are so large that our old models could not really realistically simulate them. And I therefore innovated our models to be able to combine these scales a little bit so that we don't really have to make big compromises when we want to model, for example, smallholder dynamics and large-scale land acquisitions. We can now do that with new model in the same simulation side by side. It's quite a lot of technicalities and I'm happy to discuss them in questions, but for now I kind of want to give you a showcase of what you can do with such models and also tell you why I think it's relevant that we include large-scale land acquisitions in these models. And I want to do that with the second study I did on modeling large-scale land acquisitions, and that was in Cambodia. And Cambodia is a great use case because it is struggling to make good policy decisions. And it wants to have large-scale land acquisitions because they generate foreign direct investments and it's good for the economy, at least they believe. But it also, the country also has these big ambitions when it comes to nature conservation. Cambodia is a country that's actually quite rich in nature with these beautiful deciduous forests. Here in this map, they're shown in brown color, tropical deciduous forest. And that's a prime habitat for example, for tigers. And Cambodia also protects these areas, at least on paper. This is the most protected country in the world, as far as I know. And it's they do this to some extent because they want to reintroduce tigers in Cambodia, which is a national animal, but it's also currently locally extinct. Now, at the same time, however, we have seen that Cambodia has welcomed large-scale land acquisitions at a massive scale. As you can see in orange in this map, acquisitions have been granted in protected areas as well. So you can see the conflict. And another issue is that most of the large-scale land acquisitions are not really being used to their fullest extent. So I used satellite imagery, some time series from Landsat to check which of these allocated areas are actually being used as plantations. And That's what you can see, the colored areas here, and it's actually only a minority of them are currently being used. And this was a major headache when I went to Cambodia. I talked to some policymakers. This was really something they couldn't get a grip on how to regulate that. Now back to tigers though. This map shows you in 2015 where we could reintroduce tigers in the dark green areas, large enough natural areas to reintroduce a population. And here we should focus on the Eastern Plains because that's the target area that the government wants to reintroduce tigers into. Now, I ran some future-looking scenarios. This is 2015, but then we model into 2040. And if we don't have any serious large-scale land acquisition regulations, so we don't really protect natural areas, we don't do anything about this non-use of the plantation area of the allocated areas, then you can see that the Eastern Plains will fragment and there cannot be a viable tiger population there in the long run. That's contrasted with the second scenario that I ran, which is where we do the polar opposite, and the government would only grant smaller acquisitions, hundreds of hectares instead of thousands, basically, and only on highly suitable land, basically meaning you need to have a good business case before you get land here, and not in protected areas. So then we can actually save the Eastern Plains, but it requires very strong governance, and that's currently lacking. And if it continues to be lacking, then you could still reintroduce these tigers, but you should probably look at some other destination area that is less optimal for tigers, but also less optimal for large-scale land acquisitions. So, for example, the Western Cardamom Forest. So moving on, after all that modeling, large-scale land acquisitions, I kind of wanted to zoom out a little bit and put large-scale land acquisitions in a wider context. Look for trends that are similar but not the same. And in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, you can see there are increasingly more signs that medium-scale farms are on the rise. These are said to be somewhat larger than your average smallholder, but smaller than your average large-scale land acquisition. So we're talking tens of hectares, not 1 or 2 or 1,000. They are said to be managed also by business people and often people from urban areas. But all of that is quite speculative because we do lack empirical data on this. And that's what I set out to do. I want to collect empirical data, went to Kenya, the Kenyan Rift Valley, and interviewed small and medium and large scale farms side by side in a dedicated sampling frame, which then allowed me to compare small and medium scale farms and understand whether they are really that different from each other. And what we found is that, well, contrary to claims in other literature, is that there is really no evidence that medium scale farms have recently emerged in this study area. We do see that there is a slightly different farmland use. Medium scale farms tend to dedicate more land to grazing, while small scale farms focus on staples as well as on cash crops. Then lastly, we also see that the village markets, surprisingly, is the most important market also for medium scale farms, contrary to claims, because you're always presented as export oriented or urban oriented. Still no, the village market remains the most important, but it's less important for medium scale farms compared to small scale farms. Now, what then struck me from this and from visiting these places, analyzing this data, is that there's such a large diversity. And therefore, I try to nuance previous literature on this phenomenon. And I conclude that the farm size category that a specific farmer belongs to is not very informative to tell us what kind of farmer this is. Because behind all these average, we found very entrepreneurial small scale farmers, but also quite traditional medium scale farmers. So we should not over-interpret farm scale trends, even if these are quite easy to detect in census data. Lastly then, I wanted to bring it all together and try to show you why studying these new actors from a land system perspective matters to solving current pressing issues. And I developed the idea of an agency diagram, which represents the relative ability of 3 actors to make decisions in a land system. So we have value chain actors, state actors, and land managers. They will all have some influence over a land system. And if we then plot smallholders, they cover a wide area in this diagram, ranging from highly regulated smallholders to not regulated at all, and from influenced by value chains to not influenced by markets or value chains. If you then look at protected areas, well, that's more something that is on the top of the diagram where governments are in control. And we can add stuff to this. Contract farms, for example, would be smallholders that are way more towards the left side of the diagram, towards the value chain actors, because they are engaged in contracts with processors or supermarkets. And that, therefore, these supermarkets, for example, will have more to say about the land system. We can also add large-scale land acquisitions. Obviously, these would be in the lower left corner here, and the medium-scale farms, as discussed, somewhat to the left, but covering quite a large range still. Now, all the processes that I study can all be seen as an agency shift towards the lower left corner. And that means that value chain actors have a more tight control over increasingly large areas of land. And individual land managers then lose lands, or they lose the ability to autonomously decide over their lands. And governments, meanwhile, are faced with new actors that they find quite hard to regulate or govern. And I did a literature review to try and synthesize all we know about this agency shift and to find what the implications could be for one of the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, land degradation neutrality. That's the ambition to halt land degradation through sustainable land management and restoration. And now the question then becomes, how can we reach this target given the agency shifts? And first, there's the bad news. My review suggests that these shifts can cause degradation. There are causal mechanisms there that link them. Because, for example, in natural areas, current forests, the tiger landscapes that I showed you for Cambodia, for example, the agency shift can act as an unlocking power. These natural areas tend to be protected by two kinds of locks. One, an ecological lock, where it is, for example, too dry or unsuitable for agriculture. Or there's also the institutional lock, where governments or also indigenous people safeguard such areas. And we see that these agency shifts, well, they can unlock these locks. For example, they can unlock the ecological lock by bringing irrigation and other technologies, or the institutional lock by lobbying, also corruption or simple disregard of norms and regulations. That's for the natural areas, but on the agricultural areas, we can also see similar things. The current agricultural areas, here we see that there are introduction and incentivization of unsustainable land management. For example, because of absent landowners. Landowners who don't live in the rural areas themselves are less likely to care much about sustainable land management. There's also short-termism associated with value chain actors. Value chain actors also engage more in monocultures or intense input use. That's bad news, but it's not all bad news. There's also the fact that these value chain actors have more power also means that they could use that power in the interest of LDN, and that's what I also went looking for. They would have to be able to then try to reduce or reverse land degradation. That's degradation neutrality. And I went looking in the literature whether there are examples of value chain actors actually using their power to do just that. Turns out, yes, there are these tools and they are using them. They have these carrots, sermons, and sticks, so basically rewards, penalizations, and best practice agreements. They can, for example, offer trainings to farmers. They can engage in codes of conduct, roundtables. They can demand from contract farmers that they do specific land management practices, and they can certify those contracts, those practices then. And at the most stringent side, supermarkets, retailers can even set standards for how the products must be produced, or they can ban entire parts of the supply chain from supplying. And all of these things, I found examples of them being used for sustainable land management. This means they can be instrumental for LDN, but they are not the only solution. They can, for example, not really help much in reversing land degradation, which we also need for LDN to be achieved. But the message is that the UNCCD, who is coordinating this LDN target, and I work together with them as well, that they should find ways to work with private companies instead of only focusing on governments and small companies. Now, that's it from my side. Just want to emphasize this was not a one-man job, and here are some of the nice people that I have been able to work with throughout the years on the things that I presented today. And I'm looking forward to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Niels, and very kind that you were still showing a picture that from the area we were together, I think 5 years ago. That was a nice souvenir. So we can all express our emotions in this Zoom meeting, and it's only positive emotions. I see you can use the clap like this, or you can do a thumb up, or you can even have a heart, or you can laugh with it. Maybe that's semi-positive, or you can be astonished, or there's the party symbol also. So maybe we can use that to express our emotion. Can you see mine? If I click here, I clap. Yeah.
Thank you for all those overwhelming emotions, Anton.
Yeah. But it's only positive, you know, in this Zoom, in these hard times. I think Zoom decided we can only support each other and not boo or do something like this. But it was very interesting, Niels. But I think some people may have questions about it. So now it's for the audience. If you have a question, you can raise your hand, and then I can unmute you. Yeah, you have to wait a bit to break the ice, maybe. Maybe I can start with a short question, Niels. So in this debate on upscaling in the farming, often an argument pro is that the productivity in the larger farms is much higher, and as such, if you assume a sparing system, you could take out of production certain marginal land. Is that something you encountered in your study areas?
That's actually a very controversial question almost. And that's nice. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's a whole debate on whether it is true that larger scale means larger productivities. And the debate hasn't really settled yet. There was, for a long time, the common wisdom was that the opposite is true, actually. And larger farms would actually be less productive because, well, for example, a major coffee farm of 1,000 hectares, if a couple of those coffee shrubs are not producing well, you're not even going to notice. But per hectare, it will matter. While if a smallholder has 5 shrubs, well, they'll be taken care of quite well. So that was the reasoning there. It's very hard to measure this empirically if that's actually true. Very precise measurements, and well, all of us who've done field work know that precise measurements on the field are very difficult to achieve.
Yeah. Okay.
That being said, though, I mean, there's this whole thing about modernization. Certain technologies are only available once you apply them at a certain scale. You're not going to buy some of these techniques for just 2 hectares. And definitely in Kenya, you saw farms that are just too small. They're less than a hectare large. It becomes quite hard to make them economically viable. That's one thing. And the last thing I want to say is if we measure productivity in relation to this question, it's per hectare, but you could also measure productivity per unit of input, for how much fertilizers you use, how much pesticides you use. And then again, the smallholders tend to win that battle. It's quite controversial. I mean,
Okay. I asked this controversial question because in my university there is a group of eco-modernists, even in university management, that say we have to go to large scale because it will be more productive, and all these smallholders should, well, they don't say that bluntly, but should stop sooner or later. So we only have modern agriculture and then more nature. That's their view.
Yeah. Question is who decides? That's always the question. Who's going to decide that all these smallholders have to go? I mean, it's
absolutely.
A farm is not just a production unit. A farm is also a livelihood unit, and it's also an environmental unit. So all 3 of these roles of the farm should be taken into account. And then still, I don't want any technocrats to start deciding that all farms should be this or that size and they should all get a bit bigger, and then we will remove the surplus people to I don't know where. So it's a quite complicated thing, and we shouldn't oversimplify these things.
Okay. Yes, but now it's the floor is for others. I can see hands. Maybe Brigitte, you can see. Is there no questions for Niels?
Anton.
Yes, who is talking? Sorry, I cannot see.
Yeah, this is Emmanuel, because I don't see any icon for hand raising. That's why I just jumped in.
Go ahead, Emmanuel.
Maybe, thank you, Niels. It was really interesting presentation. And then to start with the controversial question that Anton raised, as I am from one of the sub-Saharan countries in Ethiopia, where there are a lot of smallholder farmers, maybe 85%. And agriculture is the basic of the economy. Most of it is rain-fed and subsistence. It's in general less input and less output. But due to some, large-scale demonstrations to enhance the production and productivity of agriculture in our country, as it is a means of livelihood, it cannot be transferred to, large-scale private investors. So that what we are doing is that we are clustering farmers, so that smallholder farmers will come together, so that it's easier for resource mobilization, for inputs application, for mechanization and irrigation, and even on the top of that, for the better marketing outlets, we are just following the clustering approach because it's proved that the production productivity will be increasing. So this is commenting this. My question is, in your first slides, can you hear me?
Yes, of course, I can hear you.
Yeah. In the first slides, you presented on the land acquisition models. Yeah, there are land acquisition models, and you showed that the transition from forest to smallholder, mosaic smallholder, and from mosaic smallholder to urban. But in our case, there are also direct acquisition from the wetland or natural forest into private investment. Like it's for foreign direct investment strategy. So one of the means for the government to fetch the foreign currency. So directly forest lands are also transited into the private investment for agriculture. So I didn't see this land acquisition as part of your model. Maybe, I don't know if you can explain. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question and the remark. I can be quite brief about the question. That was, this slide here, back, it's quite a lot of clicks, but it was just an example really of how our models work. There are many more transitions that I couldn't show all of them. We have hundreds of these possible transitions, and yes, my models do include transitions from natural areas to large-scale land acquisitions immediately. That is also included. About your remark, it's quite interesting, these cooperatives, or what you called it, was it combining farmers together? Well, you can see it all over, and it's something I didn't look into that much, but every time I talk about this work, I do hear that remark, that indeed cooperatives are one other way of working at scale, and it's something we should definitely look further into. It's the next research avenue, basically. Thank you.
Okay, that's a very nice suggestion, I think, these cooperatives. Are there more questions? We can also take the suggestion of Brigitte. If you have a question later, while the next presentation is already ongoing, you can type it in the chat, and at the end of the presentations, we can come back to it. But maybe there is one more question now.
I have one if I'm allowed.
Yes, Jasper, you're allowed, of course. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, don't worry, Niels. I won't be mean. It's a genuine question. We're here in the working group of urban-rural relations. Now, I frequently read kind of anecdotal, narratives, so to say, that relate agricultural change to urbanization, another major trend, the increasing share of the population living in urban areas. I wonder, based especially on the extensive literature that you've read, how do you think the causality exists here? Is the upscaling a change in agricultural markets, in increasing roles for value chain actors a result of urbanization? Or maybe the other way around, is urbanization, especially, and I'm talking now about, let's say the global south, is urbanization a consequence of the fact that agricultural systems are changing towards larger systems? How do you see that relation?
Yeah, thanks.
Good, a very difficult question, yes.
Yeah, no, it's a super interesting question, I would say. it's also one that hasn't got a real clear answer yet. But the common theory here is the structural transformation theories that basically, the simplest way I can explain that is the amount of people working per hectare in rural areas is to a large extent determined by the wages paid in urban areas and the wage difference between rural and urban areas, basically. So if you can earn a lot of money in the urban areas, people will move to those urban areas, which will create labor shortages in rural areas, which will then cause for upscaling and what you could call mechanization, labor-saving technologies in rural areas. So that's where the causality is. It's more like a loop, because then those upscalings will then create some push for even higher wages in the urban economies as well. So that's the shortest way I can answer that one.
I would obviously also like to know how to reflect it in a model, but that's maybe beyond the scope of this this meeting. I think we can talk for an hour about that theoretical loop anyway. Thanks a lot for the answer.
And we will talk about that for sure.
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion that already comes out. Okay, good. Also, this last question, I think, brings us without any, well, it has a close link with next presentation, which is on rural-urban migrations and the causes and consequences. And I would like to invite Samuel now to upload this presentation. If there's still questions, you can use the chat to type a question in there, and we can, at the end, we can come back to them. Samuel, are you able to upload? Yes, I can see your screen. Not yet in presentation mode, but okay. Perfect. It works for me. I can see it, so I think all the rest also. So you can start. Maybe start with saying a few words about yourself.
All right. Thanks, Anton, and thanks, Niels, for the presentation you have given. I think my presentation will fit in from the last discussion from Jasper that he said. Well, I'm Samuel Tumwesigye. I'm doing a PhD research with Mbarara University and KU11, and I'm focusing on rural-urban interactions with an entry point of rural-urban migration. From my first slide, I just put pictures to give you an indication of what a rural setup in Uganda is. This picture on the upper right-hand side is a rural setup in Uganda, and then the lower picture is an urban center. And these two pictures are taken from the same region. Actually, this city is the regional city where this rural area is. And you can see at what extent it is expanding, expanding horizontally and going into the rural areas. And that's the kind of interaction I'm looking at. My presentation will take this outline. I'll set the context, and then I'll take you through what we have been doing in understanding who migrates and why, and what are the consequences for that in terms of rural-urban interaction spaces. I've set the context. I would say for the last 2 decades on the subcontinent, in sub-Saharan Africa, there has been socio-economic transformation with increasing GDP per capita, with poverty reducing and people living healthier. And that has resulted in population growth. For the sub-region for sub-Saharan Africa, it has been at 1.3% per year, with associated urbanization rate of 4% on average per year. And we can see which countries are urbanizing fast, including Uganda, which is my case study and where I'm based, urbanizing at a rate of more than 5% annually. Talking of Uganda, just to describe where it is located geographically, it's in East African region, and it's bordered by Kenya in the east, and the Democratic Republic of Congo in the west. So the population dynamics in Uganda, it's one of the countries with the moderately high population growth rate of average 3.2% per year since 2000. And with urbanization population percentage of 25% as per last year, and having an average annual urbanization rate of 6%. I included this map to indicate the spatial distribution and the size of urban centers in Uganda. You can see how uneven they are distributed and the relative size of different categories, small, medium, and large towns. Of course, with Kampala being the biggest, hosting close to 2 million people who reside there, but during the day, hosting over 5 million people. So looking at that and the level of urbanization and population growth, from literature being informed that the main drivers of urbanization are mainly three: in situ natural growth, area reclassification, and rural urban migration. We tried to reflect on these drivers. With natural growth, there is a declining trend of total fertility rates in urban areas.
What do you mean?
Sorry?
Someone didn't mute the microphone. I don't think it's a question.
Okay.
You can go on.
Yeah, yes, the natural growth is contributing to urbanization in Uganda, though the total fertility rates are declining in urban areas. So the rate at which it's happening wouldn't be only contributed to by natural growth. The same applies to area reclassification, but area reclassification is not being done in most of the urban areas as shown on the map. And that one leaves us with a driver of rural urban migration. There is little statistics and research on internal migration in Uganda. It's only the last census, which was conducted in 2014, that gives a hint on the possibility of how many internal migrants there were. But what is interesting with that statistic is that also 66% of the internal migrants who were enumerated then indicated that they permanently settled in urban centers. So this clearly sets a pace that rural urban migration is contributing to the fast urbanization rate we are observing in Uganda. And projections indicate that by 2050, 60% of Ugandans will be in urban areas. Therefore, the interest arose to understand the migration dynamics, to understand who migrates and why, and what would be the consequences in terms of land use, where they come from, and where they end up to. So our study resolves around that. In understanding who migrates, we set out household surveys, and this was conducted in one sub-region in southwestern Uganda. It's a region called Ankole. I've shown it on the map to give a clear picture of where it is. And it comprises of 12 districts and 145 sub-counties. It has crossed 3.3 million people. And it has one gazetted city, the Mbarara city, and 5 municipalities and several other urban centers. Its urban population is 27% of the total population. So it's a region which depicts above average the rate of urbanization in Uganda, and we thought it sets a good case study for us to investigate who migrates and why, and how rural space interacts with urban space with migration. So we conducted household surveys, and for both households which had a migrant and those which didn't have an out migrant, and we used the logistic regression model characterize those households which have a likelihood to have an out-migrant. And we based on the socioeconomic characteristics of the household and the social and physical environmental characteristics of the communities where the households are based on. And from that, we constructed the household typology that has a likelihood to have an out-migrant. So from that, the characteristics which defined mostly for a household to have an out-migrant, yeah, we observed that the household migration history doesn't play a role, but rather it's the social and economic characteristics such as education level. We observed that households which have members that have attained a higher level of training or education that give them a set of skills are likely to have an out-migrant. Also, the household's main occupation or source of livelihood contributed to the likelihood, and households which were not engaged in farming, but rather had activities to do with trading and business, or had a household head or any of the household member in formal employment, had a likelihood to have an out-migrant. Also household income level, of course, which stems from the livelihood sources, contributed to that. We saw that households which are characterized to live above the poverty line had a more likelihood to have an out-migrant. On variables which are on the scale of the community, we found out that households which are having, or before that, we also used the standard of living of the household to be a measure, and households which are characterized to have a good standard of living indicated to have a likelihood of having a migrant. And what was quite interesting was the location of those households, and households which were closer to municipalities in the region and in Barara City indicated to have more likelihood to have an migrant as compared to households which are remotely located. And of course, the level of access to public services and infrastructures. These are services that include health services, education, access to electricity, water, and so on. So from this, we were able to characterize a household that is likely to have a migrant, and by and large, it's the households which come from larger, wealthier, individuals who come from larger, wealthier households with educated and skilled levels are likely to send out an out-migrant. So we tested to what extent these characteristics and the model would give us a clear picture closer to reality. And these two maps, the one on the left indicates the actual situation that we observed while collecting data. The green were the households which had an out-migrant at that time when we were collecting data, and the red are the households which didn't have any member as out-migrant. And from the model, this is how it is predicted for the similar household. So it shows a cross prediction, and therefore we are able to rely on the socioeconomic characteristics of the households and those of the community in which the household is situated to predict the likelihood for the household to have an out-migrant. So what played out clearly from this is to see that proximity to towns plays a big role. And you can see that households which had an out-migrant and households which are predicted to have an out-migrant are all located along the road networks. So from this study, we also tried to find out why are people leaving, and basically these are most of the reasons that were pointed out. And you can easily see that people are leaving rural areas and preferring to go to urban areas, basically as a livelihood strategy. They are looking for employment opportunities. They perceive in urban areas there are better wages. They are seeking better business opportunities because land where they are is now fragmented and unproductive, can no longer support agro-based livelihood. So they are looking for alternative livelihood. So using these characteristics and the prediction levels, the likelihood levels, we are fitting the same information into an agent-based model to predict what will be the rural out-migration flows. And as I mentioned, based on household typologies and based on population natural growth factors, and conditional probabilities to do with likelihood that we predicted before from the logistic model, we have modeled and able to predict the outflow rate of rural out-migrants and where they are heading to from using the probabilities from the survey we conducted. I have to mention that during the survey, yes, we asked for those households which already had out-migrant, where those people who moved have ended up to. Is it a nearby municipality within the region or the regional city, or they have ended up in Kampala, which is the capital city? The region where we focus on with our research is around 300 kilometers from Kampala city, or those people have ended up in other rural areas. So with this model, which is an ongoing work, we will be able to predict out-migration flows and be able to show the spatial distribution of where they are coming from in terms of the rural areas and where they are going to the preferred areas of destination. So with that one in the picture, then we'll be able to analyze what are the consequences on land use change. Where these people are coming from, what does it mean in terms of land use types and land use change, and what does it mean in terms of livelihoods, and where they are ending up to in the urban areas, what does it mean? Will they stimulate urban expansion, and what does it imply for land use change? So, of course, from there, we'll be able to draw implications for integrated rural-urban development policy. So by and large, that's the research we are engaged in, and thanks so much for listening, and now welcome contributions.
Yes, Samuel, an applause. I think from many. So, okay, that was very interesting. A very exotic country for many of us, Uganda. I think there must be questions for you, Samuel. So if you have a question, you can turn on your microphone and ask immediately, because I cannot see all the hands that are raised.
Sorry, I hear someone speaking, but I don't pick what the person is saying.
Someone is speaking, but we don't understand. So maybe we all mute the phone. Only if you ask a question, you turn on your microphone. Yes. So someone was speaking. I don't know who that was.
Hi, this is Lauren. I think Samuel is actually logged in on 2 different accounts, possibly. Samuel, are you able to
Samuel?
Pardon?
Samuel, the voice came from your account.
I think we have it fixed. Sorry about that.
Okay, good. No worries. Okay, time for questions now.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can, Niels.
Samuel, thank you for the presentation. I'm really impressed by your work because it's always hard to catch migrants before they migrated. We always want to know where are the migrants coming from, and it's really nice that you have done this effort to find them before they left, or at least gone a long way towards that goal. I'm just wondering, what would be the policy goal really of where would your research be useful? I can see quite a lot of use cases, but is it, for example, to prevent rural outmigration because you want to keep people engaged in rural areas, or do you want to, I don't know, predict land abandonment, or yeah, I'm kind of looking for what kind of policy fields you're want to engage with this model.
Okay, I can respond that. Thanks so much, Niels, for that question. The outlook and what we focus to inform is not really necessarily managing migration or stopping migration, is to give a clear picture of where people are coming from and where they are ending to, such that migration can be managed in a sustainable way. But the focus will be on understanding where they are coming from, what are the implications on land use. If they are leaving the rural areas and they have been engaging in farming or giving labor to farming, does it mean there's more land for farming, or farming is abandoned, people's livelihoods are changing? Or if they are ending up in a nearby urban area, and most of the urban centers in Uganda are characterized by horizontal growth, does it mean there is a great inflow of people from rural areas, so urban areas are going to expand so fast? Are those urban areas having infrastructure amenities to accommodate these people who are coming in? Or where they expand to, what does it mean in terms of land use conversions? Are they eating up the peri-urban areas which have been predominantly rural? And are we seeing changes in those land use types? So basically it is to inform both urban development policymakers, but rural development policymakers to find a balance on integrated rural urban development.
Niels, are you happy with that answer? Yes,
Absolutely.
there is a question from Dawei Hu with a bad microphone. So he or she, I don't know, typed in the question. I'll read it, Samuel, to you. So I noticed that land use may be the origin and destination of rural-urban migration. Have you focused on the trend of agricultural land abandonment? So is there any land abandonment because of the migrations?
Is the question over?
Is there any land abandonment because of the migrations?
I would say from the observations, not per se. To complement the land use analysis, currently I'm conducting surveys in the rural areas to understand what have been the land use types and the land use changes for the last previous years. Of course, we will also complement that objective with remote sensing. But from my observation, there isn't much of land abandonment, but it has at household level kind of limited the level of fragmentation of land plots. The culture here in Uganda is normally, if the household is having, let's say, 2 acres of land, those 2 acres of land, by culture, they have to be shared amongst the household adults at some moment. And if all of them stay within the household in the rural area, so at one moment they will have to partition and fragment that land amongst themselves when they grow up and form their own families. So when we see a rate of rural out migrants, it means household land is left intact. It will not be so much fragmented. So a few household members who remain behind will have relatively large sizes of land to support their agro-based livelihoods as compared to if everyone remained and settled on the land. So by and large, there is no clear observation of land being abandoned, but there is observation that fragmentation is reducing and sizable plots of land are maintained at household level.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Samuel. In the meantime, questions flow in the chat box. I'll take one more, and the other, Samuel, I suggest that you answer them in the chat, or that you contact them later. Otherwise, we will take too much time. But one more question from Jay Olson, who is wondering, how do you think migration flows have changed over the years since Princess Museveni came to power? I'm wondering about the effect of economic changes in rural and urban area and political changes. So is there any change over the year? That's the question.
With figures specifically for migration, I cannot tell, but in terms of the urban growth and urban population, that one can give us a clear indication that yes, the numbers of people who are living in the rural areas are increasing if you look at the urban population growth, and that could give an indirect indication of the increase in the number of migration outflows.
Okay, Samuel, thank you. I think we'll conclude for the moment your presentation here. There's many more questions. You seem to have triggered lots of questions, and you can see them in the chat. So maybe you can take note of them and then try to answer them written, or maybe after this seminar, you can contact the people and have a further discussion, if that's okay. Normally, we would say we will discuss that in the coffee break or at the reception at the end of the conference, but here we cannot. But so thank you, Samuel. Let's move then to the third speaker. So we'll move back to Europe, but then now Eastern Europe, to Poland, to Krakow, where we have the famous Jagiellonian University, and Dominik Kaim will present, I think, a very exciting topic about the interference of urbanization with wildlife, like wolves and bears. I don't know. We'll listen to you, Dominik.
Thank you, Anton. I'm just sharing my screen.
Yes.
And indeed, my presentation will be about land use, but also about the conflicts between human and wildlife. But actually, this is a project which was started a few months ago, so I will be more focused on what I would like to do, so a little bit less about the results. So yeah, my study area is just a part of the Carpathians, the Polish part of the Carpathians, so located mostly in the north. And I will try to explain why it might be interesting from land use perspective. First of all, if we are talking about land use, it's quite important to mention that the main process observed in the Carpathians over the last 150 years, and sometimes even longer perspective, depends on the location, is a forest cover increase. So in general, we observe a forest cover increase over this period. And what we know from the research we did, like some simulations for the future, we are pretty sure that this increase will be continued. Depending on the scenarios, it might be a little bit more dynamic or less dynamic, but still we are pretty sure that it will be continued in future. As you can see on the map, my study area is located on the borderland between Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, and Ukraine. And to some extent, this process is observed also in the neighboring countries. So it's not only about Polish part of the study area. What is the main driver of the change? Currently, we know that this is because of the agricultural land abandonment. There was a quite large research done by my colleague Natalia Kolecka, who analyzed lots of LiDAR data on the plot level, and she found that in some municipalities, more than 50% of the plots are somehow connected to land abandonment. So it's really quite a lot. That's why we think that it will be also continued in future. I did my PhD some time ago, and I did it based on the repeat photography, repeat landscape photography. And what I realized analyzing the photos was that not only forest cover is actually increasing. This is just one example. Sorry, I think I have to do it like this. Oh, maybe it's better now. So that you can see this is the same spot. There is a small tower here. This is the same tower here, so you can see this is the same place, although it doesn't seem to be. And you can see that there used to be kind of agricultural belt in between the settlements and the forests. This is not a village, it's a town, but now this town seems to be slightly different. So the forests are much more closer to the settlement that used to be. So actually this agricultural belt disappeared here. And this is quite typical, not only for the small towns, but also for the rural areas. This is a typical landscape for Polish mountain rural areas. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of settlements, quite a lot of new settlements as well. The main part of the village is located down in the main valley, so you cannot see it. But there's also quite a lot of new forests. And what is typical for Poland, this settlement is scattered. So this is unusual even comparing to the other countries of the region. So for instance, if you compare it to the Czechia, Romania, Hungary, or Slovakia, so all the countries apart from Ukraine, what we did, regardless the data you use, you will see that the Poland is always on the first position. I'm not sure if this is okay if we have this first position here, but anyway, it's more scattered than in other countries of the region. And here we go to wildland-urban interface, and I call it WUI. What's WUI? WUI is the place where the settlements are very close, so they meet or intermingle with wildland vegetation. In our climate, it would be a forest, and in most cases it's a forest. So this is actually the place which is usually studied because of the wildfires, like for instance in US, in Australia, also in Mediterranean Europe, because this is the place where the fire starts. But recently, researchers realized that not only fires are the problem of WUI, this is also the place where the diseases are spread, when we observe biotic invasions. And from my perspective, what's interesting here, this is also the place when the human-animal conflict might happen more often, simply because the carnivores and people have more contacts here. Potentially, they have more contacts here. And we are talking about carnivores. It's important to see the map of Europe. This is a research done by Hapron a few years ago. But we can see that Carpathians are quite important on the European map of carnivores. This is the area of the Carpathians, because we have brown bears, we have lynx, and we have wolves. And to be honest, especially in terms of wolves, which are quite mobile, this map looks slightly different, at least in Poland. So the wolves occupy more areas than it is on the map. So the aims of my project are twofold. First, I want to map WUI and to explain the spatial pattern in a way that, is that something new? The WUI was created because of the land abandonment and settlement increase of the last 10 or 20 years. Or this is something we observed before. And the question is whether the legacy effect is strong because of the existence over time. And the second question is directly connected to the wildlife and human conflict. So the question is whether WUI makes those conflicts more likely than the other areas. So the first question is directly related to drivers. Why do we have WUI? We tried to did it in two study areas in the Carpathians, one located in the east and the other one located in the west. We mapped settlements and forests from mid-19th century compared to the current situation. But we did something like a contrafactual scenario. So not only the current data were analyzed, but also we did kind of mixture. We combined historical forests with today's buildings and vice versa, to see what is the difference between the current map and the kind of the mixtures. And what we found was quite interesting, because it appeared that not only settlements are important to WUI creation, but also forests. And this was quite interesting because, for instance, from the research done in US, for instance, by Volker Radulov and his team, they found that in US, WUI is created mainly by the settlements. So this is kind of interesting situation for us. What we also found, adding also data from the 70s, that WUI is quite persistent over time, and it was even more dynamic in the historical times than currently. The maps from the 70s showed us that 90%, more than 90% of the WUI at the time was actually also a WUI in mid-19th century. And even today, more than 90% of current WUI was already a WUI in mid-19th century. So this is something which is not new. It's not because of a new settlement, but it was also kind of visible in the landscape more than 150 years ago. To do historical analysis, we need a historical data. And what we did quite recently, we reconstructed historical building locations over quite a large area of historical region of Galicia and Austrian Silesia. So these were the provinces of Habsburg Empire, and the Carpathians are about 25%, Polish Carpathians are about 25% of this area. And we have exact building locations, so we are kind of ready to prepare WUI maps based on that, having also the forest reconstructed. And we want to combine it with statistical data from the Hungarian census organized every 10 years. To do so, we need to reconstruct also the administrative boundaries on the village level, actually, because the statistics are quite often available on the village level. So there's still quite a lot of work. But if we do it, we will be able to analyze the drivers based on the historical socioeconomic data. Since we have buildings and we have forests, we started to create WUI maps, being curious how might it be. And what we found, this is just the preliminary research, what we found that WUI was visible over time, and it was even more visible in the northern part of the study area, and still it is like that, than in the southern part. What is somehow different or contrary to where the animals are observed. So mainly the areas which are occupied by wolf, lynx, or bear are located in the southern part, which is more forested simply. So on the one hand, we may say that theoretically there shouldn't be so many conflicts, since the WUI is mainly on the north and the animals are living mainly on the south. But we tried to focus on the small study area located on the south, somewhere here, so on the borderland between Poland and Slovakia. And we compared WUI locations to regional data on compensation for damages caused by protected species. All of the species are protected species. So for instance, if the bear will destroy you a beehive, or wolf will attack your sheep, you can get your money back because of them. There's a kind of procedure on that. But what we have is the data where it happened and when it happened. As you can see, there's quite a lot of damages actually happening exactly where WUI is. So we are quite happy to analyze more data on that. And this is actually the second aim of my project. Thank you for your attention. And I'm happy to open to answer your question.
Yes, thank you, Dominik. That's super interesting. Already the pictures that you show of the landscapes are very attractive to me, and I think I should come and explore the area very soon. But I guess there is lots of questions. This is, I think, a very innovative topic, and it's the first time I hear a presentation like this, which perfectly fits the scope of our working group. It's a typical example of urban versus rural and versus nature. And I can imagine there is questions. And also a reaction in terms of an emoticon, maybe? Yes. Okay. So questions from the audience? Not immediately. Maybe I can start with with a question. I'm wondering what the perception is about the people living in these WUI areas. Do they accept the damage they from time to time suffer from because of wildlife, or are they asking for measures to be taken, or what is the perception of the people that are actually involved in these interactions?
I think this is a very interesting question. The thing is that on the one hand, these animals are living there for years, so people are kind of accustomed to the situation. So for instance, if you have more sheep, you are kind of prepared to that. So there are several measures how to prepare, for instance, to existence of wolves in the region and so on. But on the other hand, as I mentioned, especially wolves are quite mobile. So they appear in the areas where they were not visible for more than 100 years, I think. So in that case, people are a little bit more skeptic. So this is a kind of open-ended question. And also it's a question how this image is created via media. So, you know, if the wolves are shown only if they're attacking animals, sometimes the stories are that, for instance, wolves are attacking roe deer. And actually, there's nothing special in this. It's quite common because this is what they do. And there's a story because of that on media. So it's hard to say. But on the other hand, I would say people are quite, let's say, accustomed to the situation that animals are living close.
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. There is a question in the chat by Volker Radelov. Great talk, Dominik. Yes. Do you think the WUI is especially widespread in the Carpathians or common in other parts of Poland as well?
Hello, Volker. Thank you for the question. Very good question. So from my perspective, the settlement is more scattered in the mountain areas than the other areas. But to be honest, we don't know. We don't know, and this is the thing we have to check. So potentially on the next, for instance, GLP meeting, maybe I will have a map of WUI for Poland, so I will be able to answer this question.
Okay, yes. I think it's a widespread problem now throughout Europe that even Belgium is greening a bit, and we now, since a couple of years, also have wolves, which cause a lot of fuss. So many people are enthusiastic about it, apart from the farmers who suffer from sheep that are being killed. I think in the longer run, Dominik, your research could be a starting point from comparative research between different European countries, or maybe even intercontinental. I know from Africa, like the African researchers here, they can definitely give examples of also wildlife farming interaction, which is causing lots of controversy also in many parts of the world. So it's very stimulating and inspiring, this research, Dominik.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anton.
There's a confirmation from Romania, from Simona Gradinaru. Yeah, very common, these interactions. Yes. Okay. So this brings us, I think, if there's no immediate questions for Dominik now, but well, the list of contributors and of participants in general will be shared, so you can always contact each other later also. But then I think we can conclude this first young speakers seminar here. I think for me it was very nice. I think it was a success, and we can repeat it. So some homework for you. You can spread, of course, the message that we have these seminars now, and we can even grow maybe a bit in number of participants, although I think 45 that attended today, that's already very nice. And secondly, if you know of speakers that could give a contribution like this format, not very long presentations, but very interesting, then you can tell them, or you can, if you're interested yourself, you can send me an email with a proposal, and then we'll try to fill the agenda for the coming session. So every month, in principle, we'll have a session like this, a seminar like this, until the summer break. And then we'll continue after the summer break, and we hope to continue with this until at least the pandemic is over and we can see each other again in real life. And maybe we'll continue till the next Open Science meeting of the Global Land Program. That's more or less a time horizon we have in mind. So Bridget asked, do not forget to add your name and interests if you have some minutes left in the Google Doc form, so that you can be contacted later. But if there is no further questions or remarks, I think we can conclude here. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all back next month. I think it's April 15, the next session. So take care of you and see you later. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
See you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.